The problem is I needed to record the minutes. So, apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Steadman and an apology for early departure, possibly from Councillor O'Malley. Have moved Councillor Wilson. Seconded Councillor Stones. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I move that the committee confirm the agenda without addition or alteration. Seconded Councillor Lofisel, thank you. Discussion, Councillor Hall. Oh, right. That's fine. Your enthusiasm is noted. All those in favour? Aye. And those against? That's carried. Declarations of interest. There being nothing flagged up, no one's got any new companies to add. I move that the committee... Oh, it's been done yesterday, so that's fine.
None in between that.
Where would you find the time to... I'm happy to move that the committee note the elected members' interest register and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Seconded Councillor Wilson. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? That is carried. Thank you. Minutes of the Otago Settlers Museum Board. Councillor Elder.
I move that the minutes for the Toitu Otago Settlers Museum Board be accepted.
Seconded Councillor Hall. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's carried. Did you move both of them?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was being corresponded with. That brings us to Part A reports. Dr. Griffin.
Kia ora.
Welcome.
Kia ora. If I may, before I start, I'd like to recognise in the public gallery today is Michael Frawley, who is the director of the Motat Museum in Auckland. Michael's down here to have some fairly... Well, he's down here to watch the rugby, but in addition to that, he's come down to have some serious discussions with me about the fire service levy that potentially is going to be deployed in the next couple of years. Now, Michael is a fully qualified lawyer and has been leading the charge to get a waiver for cultural institutions. This proposed levy would have a significant impact on the cost of running the museum, particularly if the value of the collection is taken into account. So I just wanted to recognise Michael in the audience today, and he's come down here specifically to talk around that purpose as well as watch the rugby game tonight. I'm happy to speak to the report, but as you can see, it's been another busy period for the museum. One of the challenges in reporting to you is that the museum board cycle is slightly out of phase with the meeting cycle, so I'm reporting about a month or two in delay. So I can't mention in my report how last week we opened the Hakui Women of Kaitahu exhibition at the Canterbury Museum. That was an exhibition that we ran at our museum for about 6 months, and we moved it lock, stock and barrel up to the Canterbury Museum. And last Thursday night we had a brilliant opening with many women and representatives of the Maori community joining us for the opening, and that was a big success. In this report, I basically cover the period up to and including the last school holidays, and the attendance at the museum this year is going to be very good, at least equaling last year's attendance. Across the board, projects are going well. The major project we have in hand is the redevelopment of our Discovery World Science Centre. We will be closing Discovery World on the 24th of July, and it will be closed for about 4 months as we rip it out and replace it with about 50 new interactive exhibits, reopening on the 1st of December. The museum's been investing about $2.5 million into this project, some of it from our reserves. About $700,000 we've managed to fundraise from local community support organisations. That will be a very exciting reopening, and we think when it does open in December, we will have one of the best science centres, if not the best science centre for kids in the country, so we're very excited about that. And as part of that development, we're also going to redevelop the butterfly house and address some of the maintenance issues that we needed to address after 8 years of operating a tropical environment. The museum has also got a significant amount of funding from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and I speak to that in this report. We are the lead organisation for something called the Participatory Science Platform, which channels grants into the community to encourage local community people to get involved in science research projects. And you'll see in this report that we had a number of successful applications during the period covered. And I'm pleased to report that the museum will be running that for at least the next year. So that's another ongoing programme that's bringing in external funding. I also mentioned the outreach that we've been doing, and recognising this is Dunedin City Council, we are the Otago Museum, and it's right and proper that our activities are out there in the community, and we've done a lot of outreach, particularly science outreach, in museums and locations across Otago and actually as far down as Southland. I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have, but from my seat, the big challenge for us over the next 3 or 4 months is making sure that we get Discovery World open and up and running in time for the Christmas holidays. And you might ask what we're doing when Discovery World closes, because you're probably familiar with the fact the museum has a business model whereby we generate roughly 50% of the income that we need to run the place. And with Discovery World closing, we're potentially losing income. So what we're doing is we're opening a dinosaur exhibition called Permian Monsters. In fact, I've got to correct myself, it's not technically dinosaurs, it's pre-dinosaurs. But that will open in August. And at the same time, we're running a new planetarium show on flying dinosaurs. So when Discovery World is closed, we hope to be generating income. You'll probably see dinosaurs all over Dunedin, as well as in my office. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. It's quite an extensive report.
Yeah, thank you. One from me, firstly, that it's possibly come outside of this reporting period, but do you have any comment to make on the Regional Culture and Heritage Fund? I know central funding of regional museums has been a frequent topic of conversation at these reports to this committee. Yeah. So is that post-budget, is that something that you think is worth mentioning?
Well, one of the problems with that, I mean, it's great that there is a regional funding fund, but one of the problems is when that fund was created, the same amount of money was put into the fund, and the number of folks who can apply to it has been significantly increased. So it's actually much more challenging to get funded through that fund for capital projects. In our case, we're going through a master planning process, and we're going to develop a master plan for the museum over the next 3 or 4 months, which details which galleries we want to do, and we're going to hopefully put in applications to cover some of the cost of that. Because I'm sure, I know all of the councillors around here do visit the museum. You will probably know that the most recent gallery that has been updated was Southern Land, Southern People, and that was done in around 2000, 2001. So we've got a lot of quite old galleries in the museum, and we're very conscious of the fact that over the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have to invest a fairly significant amount of capital to replace them. Now, strategically, what we've done over the last 3 or 4 years is we've used the museum reserves to fund projects like the planetarium and like the regeneration of Discovery World and Tropical Forest, because they generate income for us. So our base level funding is going to be looked after. Then the next challenge for us is funding the replacement of the various galleries around the museum. Tangata Whenua, for example, Southern Land, Southern People, Pacific Cultures, all of those galleries, and people of the world in particular, do need to be updated and renewed. And the challenge for us is to put together a plan that allows that to happen over the next 10 to 15 years, which takes into account the fact that funding from the city is going to be relatively limited. So the challenge for us is to get that renewal done within a very tight budget, in an environment where those funds are going to be stretched. So to answer your question, it is good that it's there. Personally, I'd like to see much more funding for regional museums, particularly museums like ours that do have a nationally, if not internationally important collection, but we get minuscule national funding from Ministry of Culture and Heritage, and that's an ongoing frustration for me.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
That was exactly the question I was going to ask, so that's fine, because the only other part of that is, since you've got MOTAT here as well, I mean, are you working collaboratively across the country with the other regional museums with that approach?
Yes, specifically on the fire service levy.
Oh no, it's no on the regional funding.
Yes, through Museums Aotearoa,
Great.
we do have conversations with the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, but it is an ongoing challenge, and I am looking to have a very early meeting with the new director of Te Papa to remind him that it is a national museum, not a North Island museum, which, from my perspective, is something that's often forgotten by Wellington museums.
Councillor Vandervis.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what the waiver was for that you initially spoke of, the legal waiver.
And Michael can shout out if I get this wrong, because Michael's the expert in this, because Michael's a fully qualified lawyer. But what we're seeking to do is to get there will be a levy placed on insurances for fire protection to cover the cost of running the fire service. And what the cultural institutions are seeking to do is to get a waiver on that levy.
Maybe through the chair, if I can be of assistance. Basically, the fire service levy, they're extending the fire service to just not cover just tending fires, but also road accidents. So it's changing the model with it. One of the suggestions is that the insurance on collection items will include a levy. So one of the challenges that a museum has is how do you, one, value something of national significance that's the only one in the world? Is it zero value, or is it $1 million, $10 million? If you put a value of $10 million on it, then you're going to be paying a levy on that, which will be quite significant. The other challenge that museums like Otago have is that you have a historic building. That will also be attracting quite a significant levy over and above what it currently pays. Now, the submission that's been made to the government, and we've had 3 select committee hearings on it so far, is that collection objects held by recognised museums should be exempt from the insurance levy, and that historically significant buildings that are held in a capacity for not just the city but for the nation should also be exempt. The current position is that the select committee has recommended that that be adopted, but we're waiting to see if that comes through. So we're in a bit of a sort of a wait and see process. But going back to Ian's original comment, if that levy isn't exempted over collection items and historic buildings, the cost for running the museums and art galleries will go up quite considerably.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
I'm really glad I brought my sidekick, as you can.
Okay, yep, thank you very much for that. Bit of a worry, really, but there are other things that I'll talk to Ian about related to that afterwards. Getting back to the report, item 7, if we look at page 39, there's plotting the interplanetary cycle trail, which I thought was a lovely idea, to give people an idea of scale.
Yes.
Of the universe. And I go back to something I think you might have mentioned a couple of years ago, Ian, when you first arrived, that perhaps we could do something similar in the city. I was thinking perhaps a gold band around the rotunda representing the sun.
Yes.
And then a tennis ball up by the museum representing Earth and the relative distance and size. Is that something that we could still look at here? Perhaps even make it an artwork, bringing in the people
Yes,
that were here?
absolutely. I was going to say exactly the same thing, Councillor Vandervis. It strikes me that we've got some fantastic creative people, and if we chose to do something like that, which I'd be very keen to do, subject to approval by the powers that be, I think it would be brilliant. And it would link in potentially to the cycle trail in some way. You could probably link our solar system to that solar system, and then you get the joint marketing opportunities. So I'd very much like to do it. I think obviously we've got a few projects on at the moment at the museum, but it's certainly something we could consider, as long as it was seen by the city burghers to be something that was worth doing, definitely.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the report? Councillor Wiley and Councillor Gary, I'm assuming it's not a creative suggestion for programming.
No, but I can tell Councillor Wilson just about had a heart attack next to me.
Dunedin has the rail trail, it does part of Dunedin, so it'll be in Dunedin.
Anyway, I'm always fascinated when I read your report, Dr. Griffin. But one thing that really stood out to me, parasites collected from a 1 point long sunfish.
Yes. It's glorious. In fact, did you know, you may not know this, but I found this out the other day.
I'm telling you now, I did not know.
There are many things that I love about Dunedin, but one of the best things is that the University of Otago has probably got one of the world's best centres of parasitology. And because whenever a sunfish washes up, we send our team out to kind of recover bits of it for scientific study. This enormous, long thing. I don't think we put pictures into this, but it's a spectacular parasite. It's an enormously long thing. And we probably are going to put it into an exhibition next year. So we're really excited by it. So joking aside, yes, that's the kind of thing we get up to all the time. And the natural science team there love parasites.
I never knew there was an Otago University parasite ecological group. So, but how do you come across a platypus mounted in swing pose was purchased for auction?
Well, we have some very talented curators in humanities who are always up for finding interesting things. And actually, a platypus is something we really wanted in the collection because it's a really interesting, historically it's a really interesting thing. And we've been looking at one for a while. And one turned up, Moira, our curator humanities, has her nose, well, she smells these things out. So she comes into the office. And the museum, as you all know, has some reserve funds that are quite protected. So I know oftentimes the museum has said, oh, you've got all that money in the bank, but a lot of the money in the bank is in funds that we can only spend on purchasing stuff for the collection. It's kind of ring-fenced. So that one, when it came up, Moira came into my office and said, can we buy a platypus? I knew just the funds that I could use to kind of purchase it. But we do have that all the time. And you've got to remember museums like Toitu, Jennifer's in the audience here, we do have collections that are open and ongoing, and we are always looking for new material for those. And that platypus is going to be in our, we're doing an exhibition next year to celebrate our 150th birthday. And I know that's going to be a star of that exhibition because it's an awesome specimen.
Oh, I love a good sesquicentennial. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin, for your report. It was riveting, is the word I'd use for it. And congratulations on your achievements in it. I was really interested to see on page 25, amongst the significant outreach that you do, this was around presentation and talks and the variety of groups that you go to. Could you talk to us a little bit about the feedback you get when you do those talks?
Yeah, I mean, as part of my job, I consider myself, I have to go out and try and do 2 or 3 talks a month, as you can see, and often they're very small talks, but they do give us an opportunity to understand what the community thinks of the museum. And I use them, obviously, I talk mostly about what I know about, which is dark sky stuff, astronomy stuff, sometimes what the museum's doing. And the feedback is quite helpful, and certainly on things like the dark sky thing, I see part of the role is trying to kind of explain what that's about and how it can benefit. I won't say all the feedback is always positive. You know, some people say, no, we want more lights, and that's fine. But I think part of what the museum has to try and do is explain where we can add value, how some of these initiatives will hopefully benefit the city as a whole. But certainly I've noticed a growing interest in night sky stuff. I mean, the other night, 2 weeks ago on Sunday, there was a fabulous aurora. You may not have seen it, but it clouded out at Portobello where I was, so I drove up and I thought, well, blimey, how often is it you see an aurora from the centre of the city? So I actually drove to the top of Signal Hill, and I was gobsmacked because there were about 50 students up there taking selfies. And it was really amazing. This was about 11 o'clock 2 Sundays ago. So I was really impressed that not only is there a community out there that's going to look at this stuff, but there's a communication network in Dunedin that allows people to find out and go out and do it. And I know, I mean, maybe one of the problems we've got out at Portobello now is if there is an aurora, there's quite a lot of traffic around Hooper's Inlet, and some of the problem is you get too many cars ruining the view because they're all trying to see the aurora. So success sometimes isn't great. And so I regard, I mean, to come back to your point, one of my personal performance indicators is to make sure I do go out at least once or twice a month to go and talk to a community group about what the museum's doing or an aspect of what I can do in the museum, because it's really helpful, because oftentimes feedback forms in the museum don't always tell you what people want to know. So I regard this, even though it takes a bit of time to do, I think it's one of the most important things that we can do at the museum.
And I wouldn't underestimate the reach, because if you look at, for example, the Otago Primary Principals meeting, you're reaching a lot of groups through that. But thank you very much for the explanation.
Further questions? Someone want to move We note the report. Moved Councillor Wilson, seconded Councillor Staines. Any discussion? There being none. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you, Dr. Griffin.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Community and Culture Non-Financial Activity Report for the quarter ended 31 March 2017. A catchy title. Welcome, Mr. Hawke. Ms. Pinfold. Any opening remarks you want to make?
Through the chair, if I may, I'd just like to apologise in advance. Paragraph 14 has a typographical error. In the second line, the word increase should be replaced by decrease. As councillors would have seen, most of the bars are heading in a different direction. Apologise for that typo.
Not in March, though. Okay. Any questions of the report? Councillor Benson-Pope.
I'm just trying to work out how I could phrase this, but yes, I've done it. The figures, the satisfaction figures, are obviously something that gives you considerable pleasure. Can you give us some advice about how Toitu is going to further improve on the missing 2%?
Through the chair, I would concur with Councillor Benson-Pope's comments that certainly the community satisfaction with the cultural institutions is at a high level, and it's really hard to improve on it, but is a tall place to fall from. But we certainly will do our best to maintain that level of community satisfaction.
Very satisfactory, thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Gary.
Mr. Hawke and Ms. Pinfold, thank you for the report. I enjoyed reading it, and I wanted to ask you about paragraph 24, which was around the gap filler seminar, which I attended and found absolutely amazing. What I wanted to know was how many of the staff got the opportunity, DCC staff got the opportunity to attend that across different departments? Defer to Joy.
Welcome, Ms. Gunn.
Kia ora tātou. I put an open invitation to all council staff, but I believe we only had about 15 staff who took up that opportunity.
It's a great pity because it was most beneficial, and I wonder if they would be all from all different departments, because it seemed to me that it was very worthwhile. Do you plan to do other sessions like that across the community?
Through the chair, yes, the intention is that we continue those sorts of activities, whether or not we get gap filler back, but we're certainly looking at a range of other groups.
Given that the gap filler project is around temporary activation of vacant outdoor sites largely, or at least that was its origins in Christchurch, and that is something that's specifically mentioned both in our public art framework and the currently still draft Parks and Recreation strategy work. Is that something that we're going to be, is that being pursued in any way by staff in terms of how that might be facilitated if people that went to that workshop wanted to act upon it?
Yes, and that's the intention. So the staff who attended those workshops are actively looking at where we go with the ideas and how we can apply it within our different departments.
Great, thanks. Councillor Alder and then Councillor Lofiso.
Hi, thanks for the report. And the museum at 98% is doing rather well. I was just bringing up about the Dunedin Public Library visitation numbers, and I note that they're consistently, a tiny bit down. Is that like people talk about trends about not reading books, etc., etc.? Has that been a trend over a number of years? And so I'm just wondering about that.
Through the chair, The patterns of usage do change over time. I think with increased electronic access and increased access to internet at a wider range of venues, the library ceases to become the key or the only place where people can access the internet. In fact, it's becoming very prevalent right across Dunedin and other cities, and that certainly has an impact on visitation. But even just changing patterns of usage in that people no longer need to borrow items in the traditional way. They can download them, they can read them on their tablet or device. So what we're seeing is a change in patterns of usage, and we attempt to respond to those.
My second question is kind of related. You've got that internet hub or gig hub in the library, and I was just wondering a little bit about how that's going and what the uptake of that is.
Through the chair, there's some aspects of the Gig City Living Hub that are working really well. Certainly the long white table with the different devices is very popular, not only for using those devices, but we even find people sitting there reading or even doing a jigsaw puzzle. So it's a prominent feature, and it certainly has attracted a lot of positive feedback. We're still working on I suppose, optimising the use of the cube. There's some change of content on there, but there are opportunities that we haven't been able to fully explore at this stage.
Oh, thank you, Bernie.
Councillor Lofiso.
Thank you to the chair. Thank you for your mahi, for your work. I'm just referring to page 43, and forgive my ignorance of this of the processes, but. Is it best practice to have such a small sample? Like 1,200 in a year seems to me to be rather small for a city of this size.
Through the chair, so the approach to residents' opinion surveys have been discussed with experts within the field to ensure that that the methodology and the sample size are appropriate. So that's. I'll leave it there.
The margin of error also means that Toitu could be at 100%. Councillor Lord.
I was just interested in the Chinese gardens, and I see you say in the report that it's the New Year, the Chinese New Year, but I just find it interesting that we go from 4,000 last January up to 15,000 or close to, and then I noticed the difference in the months, but I see none of those, the visitors that come here for Chinese New Year, for example, don't visit Toitu. They don't have dramatically increased numbers. Is there any reason, or is there any plan to target those visitors to get them into some of our other institutions?
Through the chairs, certainly at Toitu and the Chinese Garden, we attempt to refer visitors to other institutions. We have brochures advertising other institutions at each of the cultural institutions. But it's the difficulty with the Chinese New Year is those large numbers of people are essentially coming out of hours, out of normal opening hours, and the events for the Chinese New Year are typically held into the evening, so there's no actual opportunity to redirect those people at that time to the other institution.
So can I ask, those people that come to the Chinese Garden for Chinese New Year, are they local people or are they international people, or what's their, I mean, I understand it's Chinese New Year, but what's their main, or where do they mainly come from?
Through the chair, I don't have accurate figures on the composition of the group. I don't know if Jennifer has any additional information on that. No, but I think anecdotally it's the broad cross-section. There will be people from out of town who will specifically come for that event, part of the Chinese community or even the wider community, but certainly a lot of local people. Substantially it would be local residents attending those functions.
No further questions. I'm happy to move the report be noted. Seconded, Councillor Benson Pope. Any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Thank you. 2018 New Zealand Masters Games Planning. Welcome Ms Gunn and Ms Castillo. floor is yours for any opening remarks you may wish to make.
We are providing this report following a report we did to Council last year, where we stated that we would be doing an evaluation of the Masters Games event, and we at that time said we would provide a report on the evaluation. So this report covers the evaluation results and a little bit of information about our next steps in responding to that.
Thank you.
Happy to answer
any questions? Councillor Van Evers.
On page 56, paragraph 21, you mentioned that a principal sponsor is currently being sought. Have you had any leads or any optimism that we're getting any closer to a principal sponsor?
We have had a couple of leads. I'm not sure if we've got optimism yet, so we are still working towards that.
And the time scale that you need to operate under in order to confirm a principal sponsor, how much time do you actually have?
Ideally before we launch, which is in August. So ideally for the sponsor to get the most benefit of being associated with the games would be at launch date.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Newell.
Thank you very much. Just wondering, with regard to the naming rights sponsor, obviously we've had trouble up north with this. Is there any way we can do anything as a council to help you with the dramas you've got up north?
If you know anyone looking to sponsor an event.
So you mean help as in with what's happening up north?
Well, up north are meant to be providing the naming rights sponsors, as I understand it, for the games, but they haven't done so, and this is not the first time this has happened. That puts a hell of a lot of pressure on our event that we weren't really expecting. What can we do to stop it happening in 2 years' time? Or 4 years' time, sorry.
To be honest, I think it's highly unlikely, even if this council wrote to the Masters Games company to air their dissatisfaction with the current progress, that it would have any impact. So I think for us, we really have come to the conclusion that as a city, or as a Masters Games Dunedin group, we just need to focus on getting our own sponsor.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I was gladdened to hear that you went up to the World Masters Games and advertised, and you were saying that the registrations had picked up considerably because of that. Can you tell us how the registrations are going now, or where that's at?
Yeah, so what I said was that the inquiries to register for the games have increased. Our registration's open in August. We get up until the lead up till we actually start promoting the event. We get a few inquiries leading up to it. After the World Masters Games, we were getting between 5 and 10 inquiries per week, and it's increasing now as we get closer to our launch date. So it has definitely increased the knowledge of people of Masters events. So yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Vicky, are you going to have any attendance at the South Island Masters Games in October in Nelson?
Through our new marketing plan, we are looking at whether we have just a static stand and not actually send people up there. And we generally do send people up, but with the Nelson event, we've already got those people on the database. So it's, are we hitting new people to encourage them to come is what we're looking at.
Okay. And is it a case of, and understanding some of the frustrations between here and Wanganui, do you see that basically going in separate ways? because obviously there's been quite a few issues in Wanganui, and Dunedin become, basically partners with somebody else around the country or other options?
I don't think we're at a point of being able to comment on that yet.
Yet, okay. So does it, for us to have a successful event here, obviously if some of the things that could come together in Wanganui could come together sooner rather than later would be a big advantage.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything, and just sort of alluding on top of Councillor Newell's question, is there anything more that we can do from this end besides getting a major sponsor? Or is the governance overall just quite tricky?
I think that's fair to say. The governance overall is quite tricky.
Okay.
I just had a question around the survey, and it's great, but not entirely helpful when your second most common response is other. But were those others grouped and coded in some way, and is it just that there are 45 different ones, so you didn't put them on here, or is there more information from those responses that we're missing? Or was it just a tick box that just said other?
No, there was numerous answers that came, reasons that to try and we'd end up with a list of 45 different responses, and that they come from injuries, they came, they had nowhere to stay with, normally stayed with friends, just it varied.
Okay.
Open-ended.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. No further questions? Would someone like to move the report? Moved Councillor Lord, seconded Councillor Benson Pope. Any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? That is carried. Item 10, Council support for refugee resettlement update.
It's me again.
That's you again. Welcome. Welcome back, Ms Pinfold. Any comments you'd like to make?
Just that this report really provides an update over activity Council has been involved in over the last year in supporting, particularly over the last year, although Council has supported refugee resettlement since its early discussions about whether we would become a resettlement city. This report focuses on the last really 11 months of activity, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Gary.
Thank you for the report. I wanted to ask you a question about paragraph 26, which talks about a video that was made, that was produced, highlighting the partnership approach to resettlement support in Dunedin. I wanted to know, it was shown in Geneva, I see. What was the response to that?
It will be shown in Geneva. It hasn't been shown yet. It's due to be shown, I think, in the next wee while, and we are yet to see the final edit of that. I have seen a rough cut, but I wasn't able to share it yet.
Sorry, I saw June. Misunderstood. Thank you very much.
Further questions? There being none, someone like to move the report. Move Councillor Staines, seconded Councillor Hall. Any discussion? In that case, I'll put it. All those in favour? Aye. And those against? That is carried. Thank you. Still there.
Still
Item
here.
11. Place. No, that's fine.
You know, I could hop up and go away, but no.
Wear a fake moustache. Item 11 is a place-based work update report.
Yes, so this report provides a progress update which our department had committed to providing before the LTP, and we had discussed this also recently with within council that we would, at the annual plan, it was asked that our team look at a review of place-based support. That will happen from July. So this report really focuses on, again, the last year of activity, and in particular activity since November when the place-based advisor was employed into our department. So again, happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Councillor Van Der Vis.
I note that you're credited with having authored this report, but was wondering who the place-based advisor was, because they actually wrote the report. Is that the case?
No, I wrote the report.
You wrote the report?
Yep.
So what did the place-based advisor do then?
He provided me some information toward the report, and then I put that together because the report covers, so Nick Allbell is our place-based advisor, and he provided information into the report, but the report covered more than just his activity, and the community advisor referenced in the report is Paul Coffey, who supports the Mosgiel, North East Valley and Corstorphine communities still.
Thank you for clarifying for me. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
How does a group get defined as place-based?
It defines itself.
So any group can come and say we wish to be defined as a place-based group?
It can come along and say we have an interest in a particular geography within the community, so we're not a religiously based group or a group specifically for youth. You know, it's not an age-based group, it's not a race-based group or a church-based group, so it's very specific to whatever the geography is. It could literally be there are other communities across New Zealand who have small place-based communities which are a set of joined up neighbourhoods but not a full suburb. And so it's really people saying this is our interest, we want to connect this community, we want to grow a network of this community, we are very localised in our approach and we want to focus on this particular geographical area. So they do not have to be an established charitable organisation or anything formal.
Can any geographic area have more than one place-based group in it?
Technically it could, and there probably are, you know, if you've thought about some of our communities, there probably are groups that are working in the same community at the same time. There are some more formalised groups, however, that exist within Dunedin, such as the Caversham group and the Green Island group, who really established themselves for that one community.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
And just following on from that, would it be fair to say that there's always going to be a natural degree of overlap when you consider that people might live in one place or work in another place, and their children might go to school in another place, and therefore there's attachment to various communities and therefore community groups?
Yes, I think most people who work in the place-based area would say place-based is about the people who specifically live in the area, but I do know that there are people who work in particular communities who will say, well, we have an affinity and feeling and strong commitment to that particular area, so whilst we might not live there, because we spend our working days there, we're actually quite committed to that place-based community.
And I just had one further question, and it's around the use of staff time, and to what degree it's scheduled and to what degree it's responsive, if you like, in terms of how these groups are supported. Is it responding to requests for assistance, or is it regular meetings with groups, or just how does that work?
It is a mix of all of that, really. It's responding to requests and advice and support, and that can be by phone, or it can be come out and see us, we want to have a chat, I want to throw some ideas around. It can be proactive, so in particular the place-based role, and I think of Nick's work in South Dunedin has been more proactive, where he's gone and specifically visited to make the connection with those groups and organisations, and it can be attending and really showing up and having a presence at some community-based events to get a feel for what is important to that community, what people are talking about, and then being able to bring some of that thinking and feedback into council. It's a mix of those, and one of the things that we've just talked about in our team is actually, not becoming a logger of every minute of time, but actually creating a bit of a record of where we're spending that time and how we're providing that support, so that we've got a better sense of that over the next year or so.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
I see in item 6 on this report about place space, you were considering refocusing the neighbourhood matching grant so that priority is given to groups not covered by the community board. Can you tell us a bit more about, one, the grant, and two, what work's been done on that?
We haven't done very much work on that, to be honest. So that was something that came out of the council meeting, and we have tried to promote those grants more so that they're, we're trying to increase the different communities' awareness of them. But I would have to say that the last grant that was actually, or second to last grant that was actually done, was to an area that did have a community board. We are trying to think about the different ways we can wave the flag about the neighbourhood matching grant, because it is a small grant which would really help support community-based work and is not red tape heavy to obtain.
It's a fantastic grant, I must say, but there's lots of people who don't know about it, and that was my concern. And there are other grants that people can access, like I'm on Keep Dunedin Beautiful, and like local communities could go and apply for funding for a mural, for example. And I was just wondering if we have a collective database somewhere that sort of advertises those grants that people can go for. Just I don't know.
There is a database.
I don't know how to do that.
There is a database actually nationally called the Generosity Fund, and anyone can go into a library and log into that free on a computer and look at any funds across the country that may meet a criteria, and our funds will be on there as well. In addition, we have been looking at our own website and the way that we promote our own funding. We do actually have a web page for that. It is about how visible that is. We are also working, and we mentioned this a little bit, with a couple of organisations who have other databases in the city. I think there is actually an issue in overall in terms of accessibility of information. There's a huge number of databases in this city about what's available, services, formal and informal, and funding, and yet people will constantly tell us, I don't know where to get the information. And so we are thinking about what partnerships and what ways could be developed to make information more accessible, because the information is actually there. And I know that is a broader answer to the question you've asked me.
Thank you. I know it's difficult, but yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Yes, could I just pick up on that point about the neighbourhood matching? In the criteria for that, do people have to be part of a formal group?
No, they don't.
So I wanted to ask you about that, because in fact there would very possibly potentially be groups of people who maybe want to put on an event in a neighbourhood that would not fit the criteria under community board. I presume the rationale of thinking was that if people are in a community board area, they could apply to the project fund. The criteria of that means they have to belong to a bona fide group. No, it can't just be a group of people.
They can be a group of people. It can be anyone in your neighbourhood. You could, for example, well, not you literally because you're a councillor, but you could decide that you wanted to connect better with your neighbours and have an event. You could decide you wanted to do it for Halloween or Christmas, or just because it's a Saturday and you were going to invite your community so that you could better connect. You could come to that fund. You don't have to be a formal, and put your idea to us. And what we do is we pay the supplier, so we don't pay the person.
I understand that, but
if I can interrupt just to understand your concern. I
just want a clarification, because I feel like I've missed something.
Yeah, it was a recommendation made by council that fund would focus on areas not served by a community board. That isn't currently in practice, so that's not a. It's not that current status.
I just want a clarification on it, because
sorry.
two different groups of people, different criteria. Thank you.
Further questions? No? Someone like to move the report? Moved Councillor Lord, seconded Councillor Elder. Any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour? Aye. And those against? That is carried. Thank you, Ms. Goundl.
Welcome.
Item 12 is you still.
I will go away eventually.
That was preemptive. No. Council support for youth activity, item 12. All yours.
Yes, so this report really summarises our activity over the last 12 months in supporting, in particular, the Youth Action Committee, Dunedin Youth Council, some work under in response to the end of the social sector trials titled Collaborating for Youth Success, and also some of the youth development programs, leadership programs which the council supports, so Tuia as an example. I would like to say and really acknowledge the significant leadership of Eden Arawa Sterling as the new chair of the Youth Action Committee. She is an amazing young woman. Lucky to have her. So.
Thank you. I mean, and it's certainly been a group that has waxed and waned over time, and it's really great to see it in such rude health currently. Questions from the committee on the paper, Councillor Gary?
Thank you for this. I found it particularly interesting, but I just wanted a bit of an explanation. I did read my papers very thoroughly, but forgive me for asking the question. The difference between the Youth Action Committee and the Dunedin Youth Council was not clear to me.
Okay, so Youth Action Committee are 18 to 24-year-olds and Dunedin Youth Council are 12 to 17.
I didn't pick that up. And can you talk a little bit about the work in increasing youth knowledge of local government?
So that's really, I think, been a key drive from the Dunedin Youth Council particularly. They've wanted to try and encourage an understanding of civics among their peers and an interest in what happens in council. I think they would admit that that's a struggle at times for them to do, but they have been trying to get out and about and spread the word about getting involved and understanding what's happening in the community. So they did an event at Thieves Alley, and they are quite focused on trying to promote the youth vote. So there is some data that says if you don't, some research that says if you don't vote at 18, then you're highly unlikely to vote at all, and so they're quite keen to make sure that they get that idea of voting out to as many young people as possible, so they get that lifelong interest in civics.
So I applaud you for that. I guess the reason for my question was, and it may be a timing thing, when I was doing some work on this in schools last year, I saw no evidence of youth council involvement at all, or evidence of their existence within that age group. So perhaps that's a timing thing, perhaps they weren't as active then?
They probably kind of weren't as active at that period. I mean, most schools are represented on the Youth Council, most schools in Dunedin. We've got a couple of vacancies at the moment because young people moved, but I also think that they haven't focused on necessarily connecting strongly back into their schools, but trying to engage just with wider youth outside of their school environment, if that makes sense.
And I think it would be fair to say that in the beginning, a lot of their focus was internal and trying to build up their own systems and structures before to put themselves in a position where they could better engage with a wider youth cohort.
Yes, definitely.
Further questions? Councillor Elder?
Hi, Joy. I was just wondering, although it's outside the scope of this report, you had a youth hui the other day. I was just wondering how that went.
The youth hui came as part of the Collaborating for Youth Success work, and we had two. We had a rangatahi hui in May, and then the one last week for wider youth across the city. It was amazing. We have huge amounts of feedback to give both within and outside council, and there will be another hui for providers next week. We will be taking that feedback in to that meeting. I think that the feedback from the youth facilitators and the facilitator that we had was that young people provided incredibly insightful thinking about their wider community. I think there's sometimes an assumption that our young people think very much about themselves, but it was very clear from the information that we've gathered and that we're still analysing that they're very concerned about a number of things in our city, the environment, the standard of our housing, how accessible transport is, the drinking culture within Dunedin, and the ability of young people to access supports and services. So I think we're going to have some amazing nuggets of great information from that.
Oh, thank you. And it's really good to hear that it was so successful. Yeah.
Will that be, what will the mechanism be for that to feed back through to this, or not, maybe not this committee, but to council? I mean, I'm sure there'll be some interest in seeing that.
We've already been asked by the policy team about how much of that might be input into the LTP, and I think there's lots of things that we'll provide back to that policy team as feedback into that. And we've also said that we will provide an update later on in the year on the Collaborating for Youth Success progressive work and wherever that goes, but that will encompass the feedback from youth as well, and if and what is done in response to that.
Thank you. Further questions? There being none, someone like to move the report? Moved Councillor Elder, seconded Councillor Gary. Any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. You're free to go. Thank you. Item 13, proposed community engagement on the future of the building formerly known as His Majesty's Theatre, and I guess now technically formally known as Sammy's. Mr. Monk, Mr. Winwood, Ms. Graham, gather round.
Through the chair, as councillors will be aware, we purchased Sammy's in February of this year and have been in a holding pattern around what we would do with it in the meantime. We've secured the premises in the process of making it properly watertight, and this report suggests to the committee that we now engage in a process of consulting with the community about the future use of what was formerly His Majesty's Theatre. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be some. Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you. Can I compliment the staff involved in the negotiations and discussions that led to the situation we're in? I think it's an extraordinarily clever and far-sighted decision. We have too many at-grade car parks that were once heritage buildings in this town. So well done. The question, though, is while I think this proposal is excellent and will doubtless elicit a lot of good positive response, I'm wondering if we can include in the requests for feedback and suggestions a more appropriate name for the location. I'm not sure many people would know what the original name of the theatre was, whether or not they'd sung in choruses in their school days, but Sammy's is no longer appropriate, and I think it would be good to get some community suggestions about a more appropriate label for a facility that's going to be very important in the future.
We'll happily include that in the parameters for the consultation.
We'll decide. Let's not decide by public vote. Councillor Vandevers.
Is one of the reasons that it was such an extraordinarily clever decision that no councillors were involved in it, and it was taken without any councillor foreknowledge at all?
That's just what I was going to say.
Well, okay, another question then. Given that it was bought without any councillor decision making at all more than 4 months ago, why has it sat in a holding pattern since?
It sat in a holding pattern partly because we needed to, first of all, get it weathertight and to have some initial assessments done of the building. We've had that done, but until you know what we ultimately want to do with it, there's only so much of that work you can do. So depending on the future use, will depend a little bit on some of the repair work that we do need to do for the building.
Okay. Because there has been no information publicly available till now, the rumour mill's been churning, and I've been, well, accused really of being part of a decision which is going to require $5 million worth of maintenance just to get it up to a useful standard. There's no figure that I can see really mentioned in this report. There's a talk on paragraph 16 on page 103 of an indicative cost in the preliminary assessment report. Is the preliminary assessment report available for us to see?
I can tell you that the cost in the preliminary assessment report is about $650,000 to do seismic, waterproofing and some public use requirement strengthening of the building. But again, that was premised on a use that hasn't yet been determined.
That seismic that you're talking about, is that a seismic investigation, or is that actually seismic proofing?
It's not full seismic proofing because that will depend on the nature of the public use.
Okay. Right. In 23, on page 104, it talks about the potential reverse sensitivity issues. Are these primarily noise, or are there other issues that are anticipated? For instance, new access requirements.
It's primarily noise, through the chair.
Okay, that's of some relief. And could you perhaps give us a bit more background on the ongoing lease potential? Is it available for sale? Is it available at a reasonable price? In terms of the long-term ongoing outgoings for it, I understand that Oak would have given us a rent holiday.
They have. Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Is it anticipated that we would be in a position, or that Oakwood would be in a position to sell the lease to the city if we had a suitable use for the building?
Through the chair, without pre-committing Oakwood to anything, we've had really positive discussions with them, and they are certainly, they have willingly given us a rent holiday for the first 2 years while we engage with the community to look at future use, and based on where we get to with that, they are really happy to consider a generous contribution by way of the lease or potential sponsorship.
That's very encouraging, and thank you very much for that. On option 2, it talks about the possibility of seeking transfer of ownership to a third party who would develop the building and do the sorts of things that we would like to see done in it. Do you have any idea of who that third party might be, and would they be a trust along the lines of the Mayfair, Fortune or Regent, or are you looking for some private sort of business type third party? Have you got any more idea of what that third party option might consist of?
Again, through the chair, that is just one of the options that we thought needed to be put before council, but we don't have a third party identified. But it is an option that we could consider if that were the will of the committee.
And if that option was to be looked at, would you consider setting up a trust like the Mayfair or the Regent or something that we have experience of?
Well, through the chair, again, that would be a decision for the committee. So we would consult potentially on that option if that was the one that you were supporting, and then bring the result of that consultation back.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Ms. Graham, do we have a ring fence budget to this? Are we saying it's going to be, because obviously right now I'm looking at 128 for the purchase, 650k to occupy, 20k for community engagement.
If I may, the 659 is a figure, we haven't spent that, and we don't know yet, depending on the use, what the final figure will be. So the use will determine that. The purchase cost was from existing budgets, and the consultation will be funded as we would any piece of consultation. So all of the consultation we do with the community has a cost, and that's just part of business as usual. But no, there isn't as yet an identified budget. The plan would be subject to consulting with the community. We would bring back the results of that consultation to the committee and to council for consideration, and then depending on the decision there would be discussion about any capital that would be required and identified budgets in the LGP.
Okay. Have you had any discussions with the people behind the Mayfair Theatre or any other theatres and saying, you know, here we've been coming to council for so long and now we're sort of going to be put back on the back foot, or are they still going to maintain their level of interest with council's level of interest in them?
I'll answer this, kia ora koutou, through the chair. We've had discussions with both the Mayfair and the Fortune. I suppose their concern on the one hand was that decisions had been made without their involvement, so we've reassured them that that's not the case. They were also concerned about whether the council purchase of Sammy's leasehold meant that it was making a statement about priority of capital need around the city in terms of arts and culture. And again, we've reassured both organisations that we're not making any assumptions at this stage about those priorities, and that this doesn't put Sammy's ahead of either of those organisations in terms of their capital need. In the report, we've referred to that in paragraphs 28 and 29 in terms of the role of the long-term plan in looking at capital decisions in the city, and we've highlighted those as some other known arts and culture capital needs.
Okay. Looking at the track record of the people that have bought buildings down in Vogel Street and in the Warehouse District, why was this one so special, and could we not think that some of the other investors in that area would have actually picked it up and wanted to do something special with it also? Or did you have some information that may not be the case?
Well, at the time, through the chair, we did have information that that may not be the case, and there was a possibility that the building was going to be demolished and potentially turned into car parking. And so you ask about the reason why it might be important. The link from what is the warehouse precinct across to the Bond Street area, which is part of the next part of the central city plan in that area, this building was seen as the key link to link it to going through to Bond Street. So that was why it was considered important to buy it in the short term, to stop it being demolished. And as the report outlines, there's the possibility of councillors of a mind that now that it hasn't been demolished, you may wish to transfer ownership to another party.
Okay, thank you.
It's also my understanding that the building had been on the market for a considerable period of time, had any commercial operator wished to purchase it for that reason. Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, my questions, if I look at the options that are given here, option one, and I look at the advantages and disadvantages, there's nothing in this option. Well, put it this way, if I look at option two and it says that the option to seek ownership to transfer ownership to a third party subject to the right covenant and that it be kept as an arts and culture venue, is there anything in option one that if we follow option one and look at what people are interested, that we could potentially, is it the view of staff that the only option we could view is that it stays an arts and culture venue? Could it be that we go out and engage with the community and find that someone actually does want to do something completely different, may be prepared to pay for it? We might even make a profit, I doubt it though, but could it be that at some point in the future there may be a decision to demolish and use another, whether it's car parking or office spaces or apartments, or are we precluding all other options? Because I don't feel comfortable on a decision if we are limiting any options. I'd like to think that we could consider all and everything that's there and available.
Through the chair, the option one about consulting with the community is the recommended option, but as part of that I can see that the transfer of ownership is one of the options that would be included in that consultation, potentially.
Yes, I understand that, and I'm not suggesting it's not a good option at some point, but would it have to be with the covenant that we only keep it as an arts and culture venue, or could other ideas be considered?
My view would be the consultation would consider all ideas that the community might have for the building, and that would come back again to this body for them to consider.
So we could make a decision at some future point that maybe we at that point demolish, or complete rebuild, or complete, anything's on the table.
So there are the covenants subject to whatever covenants. Yeah, subject to whatever covenants exist on the building, because the elements of it are protected.
Okay, yep, thank you.
I wonder, Mr. Winwood, if you wanted to make any comments at this point around the role of the building's use in terms of built heritage preservation. It's mentioned in the report, but this seems like a useful point to include that.
Sure, Chair. Now, Summey's, the Majesty's Theatre is protected in the district plan through on its exterior only, and which is very plain on the Vogel Street elevation and has been severely damaged and stripped back on the Crawford Street elevation. So what really makes the building special is its interior. There's the plaster work on the ceiling, the proscenium arch on the walls. It's very well detailed, and that's one of the reasons why it's important. So the best use of a heritage building is usually in what its original use, because you can appreciate why it was built, how you experience it the same way as it was intended. Now the issue around large historic theatres, cinemas, another buildings like that, is that if you start changing the use significantly to other uses, you usually end up compartmentalising the building. You lose the feeling of a space. You lose the appreciation of the decoration that way, and so that's very much where we came from on, particularly in paragraph 7. And that's why from a heritage point of view, it makes sense to look at the building first as an arts and culture venue, as an auditorium, and try and exhaust all possibilities there before we start looking at alterations, other uses less suited to the building, before we then go all the way down the line potentially to considering demolition even.
And is that view reinforced, in your professional opinion, by the surrounding architecture in that neighbourhood?
Well, the architectural value of the building externally has been lost on the Crawford Street. That said, on Crawford Street, its neighbouring buildings do retain differing states of the earlier Victorian facades, and on the Vogel Street it presents a strong utilitarian wall to the street. It fits in well with the rest of that area too. So it does contribute in itself to the neighbourhood visually, but also it contributes historically through telling the story of the area, and also culturally and socially. It's been attracting people into that part of the city for many decades.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Wilson.
Just taking Councillor Lord's point a bit further, the problem, I just want to make sure that the clarity of the options, there are 3 options, which the first 2 don't really preclude each other, but the recommendation in the report only talks about consulting and engaging with the community. It doesn't actually talk about the options. So I'm just really for clarity checking that if this were moved as is or without the word semi in there, perhaps if Councillor Benson-Pope is going to be listened to, then it would be both options 1 and 2 would be part of that consultation. Is that correct? I'm reading that correctly?
Option 1 can include option 2, but option 2 wouldn't include option 1.
Sorry, yeah.
So all we would look at all use it. We'd have a very
Broad.
open and broad consultation with the community, and really see. We wouldn't go out with a predetermined view of what the building could be used for, but we would give some context, like Mr. Wooden has, so that we would set that framework, and then let the community tell us what they thought might be the best use for the building.
And I may have missed this when I can't read the report a wee while ago, but in order to get people in there to understand what the potential is, how much do you need to spend any more money now, or has that all been spent?
We can get them in. No. We can arrange for folk to look through the building, and as part of the consultation, I had thought we might look at how we facilitated that. I'm not sure that we were at a stage where we could run an open day as such. I'd have to check that, but it might be that we can have arranged guided tours of people having a look.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Mayor's indicated a willingness to move, but I'll continue with questions where they exist. Councillor Wiley.
So if we elect to go with a consultation process, is there an outline of, or do you have a ballpark figure right now of what it would cost to bring it up to the scale where it could hold a 600-person event? And is that going to be clearly defined in any consultation process?
The fact that there would be costs involved will be defined, but at this point, and depending on what people want, we won't know what the costs are.
But if you, again, it's a chicken and egg situation, I understand that, but if we said, okay, we want to take it back to its former purpose, to be able to have a band play to 600 people, do we know, or is there a ballpark? I would anticipate you've already done some rough figures to say, we think it was going to cost between this figure and this figure to get it to that level.
No, the only rough figure we have at the moment is the $650,000 figure.
So going to the community over consultation, we may get back that the community wants the venue to be set up to, we want it to be returned to its glory, and it's going to be able to host that 600-person concert, and they go, we want to do that, and then all of a sudden we go, well, the figure to do that's going to be $6 million.
And when the community comes back and they say they want your option through the chair, we would then price that up and bring it to council and say, these are the things that the community said they wanted, these are the costs of the various things they said, and you will then have an opportunity to decide which of those is palatable and which isn't.
But wouldn't you also think that some community may say, yes, we want that for the, but if it was cost between 2 million and 3 million, we're all for it. But as soon as they see it go to 5 to 6 million, they'd go, oh, hang on, well, we don't want to.
And as part of the consultation, we will flag that there are likely to be costs with these options, but we won't be able to be any more definite than really large kind of differences, because we don't know.
You don't know? You must have done some sort of figures on the back of the envelope.
As I said,
I don't know if that's the most useful way to inform a discussion.
No. And as I said, the figure that
back
we
of the
have
envelope
is from the indicative report.
And I would note that I'm assuming we'll hold public hearings on the long-term plan next year, and that would be the forum for the public to assert their appetite for investing in this project or not, when the costings have been done based on the ambition that they may have. Further questions? Councillor Alder.
Just a question related to venues, because I can see people are visualising it being a venue. Have we talked with Dunedin Venues Management Limited about how they might see it fitting in the stable of what Dunedin's got, and whether they see it fit or how much use it would get? Have we had a discussion along those lines? Because I can see that we've invested in a lot of infrastructure that in fact is getting conferences here and events here and Lords coming and what have you. So have they had an input into, say, a cost-benefit analysis related to events?
Through the chair, we haven't done a cost-benefit analysis, and so they haven't had any input into that, but we have had discussions with them, and they're very interested in this process and certainly will be engaged as part of the consultation, because they do see that there's a potential role were this to be redone as a venue in their suite of venues that they have available.
Thank you.
Have we exhausted questions? Among other things, potentially. In that case, the Mayor has indicated that he will move something, and Councillor Staines is seconding something.
Thank you. Well, can I just give a little context to this? Prior to, as the Chair has said, this property was on the market for a considerable amount of time, and apprehensions were rising in the community that in the absence of somebody having a constructive use for it, that it would suffer the fate of so many other buildings around the town, and it'd just be demolished and be a level car park. And given what's been developing in Vogel Street, that would have been a great shame. So there was considerable apprehension on the part of the wider community, and there was considerable support, particularly, albeit informal, particularly from the arts and heritage community, that something be done to save it or preserve it or just hold it until some constructive decisions could be made. I would note that despite the apprehensions of some councillors, it is within the delegated authority of the Chief Executive to spend up to $500,000 on property, and that in this case is what she has done. And very fortunate too, because by doing it that way, the negotiations were able to be relatively confidential, and I can say without fear of being wrong, that we got this property for considerably less than had it been on the open market and everybody had known about it and everybody was putting their spoke in, and etc. So we have ended up in the happy situation of having control of and preserving a building which is very dear to a tremendous range of people in the arts and heritage and performance sector of the community. We're also very fortunate to have a very generous and concerned landlord, if you like, landowner, who has indicated that they are willing to come along and partner depending on what it is that we eventually want to do. So the obvious thing is to then seek to vindicate that initial relatively cheap decision to purchase the property and go out to the community and ask them what they want. And it's not just a matter of going simplistically, here's the back of an envelope we've discovered that we put a bit of writing on and it was 600,000 for this and 800,000 for that. Is it yes or no? What we want from the community is more than a yes or no. We want ideas, we want dreams, we want visions about how this might be used, and I'm pretty sure that we'll get them. So I don't think we have anything to lose by asking our community, and I suspect that we will get some willing contributions and offers of further partnering up around uses of this which will be really fortuitous as the Vogel Street area becomes more and more vibrant, and this will just add another level to the vibrancy and spirit of that area. So I commend this. I'm aware that as someone pointed out, I think it was the Chair, that option 2 sort of includes option 1, sorry, sort of includes option 2, and that in fact you couldn't do option 2 properly without doing option 1 first. So I'm moving the recommendation as stated, but it's understood that it means option 1 and option 2, because to reassure everyone, and including the public, anything is on the table in terms of what might be done with this. It's a matter of asking our community what they think.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Vis.
Thank you very much for that, Mayor Cull. I accept that this purchase has been achieved under exceptional circumstances, and I'm very relieved to hear that we have a favourable ground leasehold circumstance. because ground leasehold can be the killer of any of this type of building. The favourable purchase price also at $128,000 I think is something which again we have to take some heart in, because I know that it was some number of years ago, but there was a church looking at paying $600,000 for Sammy's some time back, and Sam expressed some regret to me that he hadn't taken it at the time. It is a truly unique building with a truly unique history, especially for a lot of performance people going back a long way now. The fact that it's sadly lost its what was a divine frontage, if you've seen any of the old photos, something that I think potentially we might be able to have a facsimile of recreated at some time. The real uniqueness of it, though, looking forward, is not just building on its history, but the fact that it really does, and it's highlighted in the report, it really does fill a severe gap that we have in Dunedin in not having a theatre that will really handle more than 400 people and less than 2,000. We don't have anything really between half a dozen theatres that'll do 400 seated, and then the town hall and the Regent that are looking at almost 2,000. That gap at one stage was filled by what is now the Rialto. That was a 900 seater. Sabby's, I believe, is about 800 standing, but maybe 600 seated, I'm not sure. Depending on how it's configured. The bullet that I think we're going to have to bite is the recognition that Sammy's is not something which you can hand over to a third party to make a commercial go of. The health and safety requirements, the earthquake proofing, the incredible compliance costs that you have moving a large number of people in and out of a building, and Sam's had ongoing trouble trying to keep up with the fire regulations, etc. This basically means that it's going to have to be, I think, a DCC run facility, and that we may have to run it perhaps along the same kind of principled lines as Tyree Gorge Railway, where we don't expect it to make a profit, but we recognise that it has other attractive values and can enhance a lot of what's going on without, hopefully, the kind of horrendous maintenance issues that we have in the stadium that Councillor Lord has just mentioned. So given that we've got ground rent somehow under control, or at least reasonable, given that we have paid very little for the actual building itself, and given that there is a fairly strong community interest in it, although slightly piqued at not having had any part of this very brilliant decision to buy it, recognise that this really was a unique situation, and there are probably good reasons for that. So thank you very much for organising it, and I look forward to all of us around the table in the future being open with our minds regarding to what may be done with the building, and correspondingly open with our wallets. I mean, everybody else's wallets that we get to decide on. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate the staff and especially the CEO for being brave enough to take on this project. The Mayor suggested in his statement that it would be a great shame if the council hadn't done this. I actually think it would be far, far worse than that. It'd be a travesty and a catastrophe. If you walk along Vogel Street and imagine that building not there, it would just be worse than a gaping hole in a mouthful of otherwise teeth. It would just be a travesty. So congratulations, and considering exactly the reasons that Councillor Vandervis has just alluded to, how well this has been done, that congratulations is even more sought. I think it's time that as a council, in the time I've been here, we have depended and challenged landlords and land and building owners to do this work themselves, and given them sometimes a paltry amount in the Heritage Fund to support that work, but they've taken all the risk. They've taken all the risk that they open the door, start pulling down things and finding much worse situations than, and we keep on encouraging them and challenging them to convert what were really buildings that most people would have said weren't worth investing in. We continue to prod them to invest, and I think it's great that this time we're taking on one of those challenges ourselves potentially, and I have no which will support all of that other development in that area. I just think it's absolutely wonderful. So I just want to say thank you again, and look forward to the consultation that the community have to say on this. I've no doubt, and also like the Mayor, that people will offer to help on this. It is a very, very special building. Having said that, I have never in my recollection ever been to a concert there, and even from that very uninformed position, I do appreciate how it is well regarded by the city and how important it is.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I wanted to echo particularly Councillor Vandervis's comments and Councillor Wilson's comments, because I think this showed real vision on behalf of our council and courage too in lots of ways. And I was very excited by this particular decision because I think it shows commitment to arts and culture in our city, and it signals that to the community. I'm really looking forward to the engagement with the community. I think we're going to get lots of great ideas, and the community, I think, will welcome that opportunity, that it's an open to ideas rather than coming in with a format. I was very heartened that within 48 hours of the announcement, I had groups, individuals approach me with ideas and wanting to be involved, and that was definitely a signal to me, and they're from all parts of the community, that we had made the right decisions. So I congratulate the staff involved. I've no doubt there was an incredible amount of work that went on in the background, and I think it was a very positive decision for our city and for arts and culture in our city.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
I am going to support this, but I still have reservations around this, with no clear idea of what we're opening ourselves up for and for how much money this is going to potentially cost. You know what? That's the scary thing. When I hear that nothing has been done to work out what potential costs could be, we've got, from what I can see, 3 very good people that have succeeded in that area and doing some very good work, and Mr. Barnes, Mr. McKnight and Mr. Forbes. Now, I would have thought getting those 3 together with Mr. Winwood and his team would have given us an idea of roughly what sort of spectrum we were looking at, and basically assisting us in getting clearer guidance of what we're going to spend and what is going to be the potential. There are going to be limitations of what we can do in that building, but it is a fabulous space. I've hosted an event there through a fundraiser. I've had some bands play there, and it is a fabulous place, and it's well worth saving. But when we go to consult with the community, let's have some figures around it. Let's have some definition, and let's not just have a free-for-all, because I think, that's what the community will work with. But there's going to be some limits on what we can do, because we do not have an open checkbook. And from right now, from where I'm sitting, that's the perception we do have.
Thank you. Councillor Nofisel.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to also echo Councillor Vandervis's and Councillor Wilson's and Councillor Gary's supportive comments, and also acknowledge Councillor Wiley's preparedness to support this motion. I'd like to congratulate the staff for the decision and the action, and I think in response to Councillor Wiley's concerns about the process and the need to have figures, I'm reminded very much of the process to build the stadium, and there was no consultation, as far as I can see, about the wider public community. So I also thank the staff for being open-minded and having that spirit of true democracy, if you like, and just asking the open-ended questions and not putting any parameters or limits on what the community vision might be for that space. And I just like to echo the Mayor's endorsement of calling for visions and dreams and less about the money. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley. Or are you leaving?
No. I actually do also want to echo everybody else's statements here, and I was told that I attended the Pogues conference, concert there. And I also would like to say that we wouldn't have bands like that come through without this venue, and when you look at the portfolio of what we need, it is an essential component of what the city needs, and this should be viewed under amenity spending and city as a place to live.
Thank you. Further speakers? Well, for my part, I will support this, obviously. I don't think we can understate the level of anxiety that existed within our community when the future of this building was uncertain, and the sigh of relief around the city was audible when this purchase by our staff saved it from the wrecking ball at this point. And I'd like to toe-talk all the comments made in support of staff and the work that they've done in negotiating this favourable outcome to get us to this point. I acknowledge that the building or its use is not necessarily best suited for everything or indeed everyone, and having been to shows there attended by 8 people and attended by 800 people, I can tell you that some are better suited than others, but it is a core part in what we offer as a city in terms of venues of varying capacities for artists and audiences that have different needs. And I can tell you there's no shortage of interest in the building, as Councillor Gary has alluded to. I'm fielding inquiries from people on a weekly basis about trying to use it, and that's not just locally, that's people touring nationally. This is a critical part of the arts infrastructure and the landscape here in North Port Dunedin, but also around Aotearoa, and I don't think we can underestimate the value that it has and the things that it brings. What it ultimately looks like will be up to this council to decide in a time-honoured balancing of the line between our community's collective ambition for this facility and our community's collective capacity to deliver on that. And that's what this process allows us to do. We're having a conversation with the city in September about what they want it to be and what they can contribute to delivering that, and then we'll work up some costings for that. And then it gets brought back so that it can be considered against all of our other spending priorities through the long-term plan process, where people will not be backwards in coming forward, I don't imagine, in terms of expressing a view on what their financial appetite is for the future of this building. And I agree that working backwards from a figure plucked out of the year has come back to bite this council many, many times. The stadium was mentioned. And became a millstone around the neck of that project, probably unnecessarily as that played out. It's how we do it. It's how we've developed all of our strategic objectives and the plans to deliver on those. It starts with finding out what the community wants, and then filters down to a conversation of what we can afford to deliver in the short to medium term. It's not just important for our arts and culture community, both artists and audiences. People have mentioned the social history, and obviously its pivotal role in the streetscape in an area of town that has seen considerable private investment. And as Councillor Wilson has said, it's about time that we stumped up with a contribution to that area, and this is our opportunity to do that in whatever form that inevitably takes. Again, thank you to staff both in terms of the property process and in terms of putting this together. I think it's a really it's going to be a really interesting and really exciting conversation, I think, and I look forward to it happening as enabled by this resolution. Further speakers? Your right of reply, Your Worship.
Thank you. Look, there's two themes that have emerged from the discussion around the table, and one of them is cost and the other is value. And this is about balancing them up. As Councillor Vandervis alluded, the value in this is actually non-financial. The ongoing value of this building and what it might be turned into is not financial, really. And if I look back on the time that I've been on council, we have spent the last nearly 9 years, or 6 years anyway, having to scrimp and really watch our pennies, because there was a pretty adventurous capital expenditure program a few years ago, and we've been chewing hard ever since, and that's fine. We've got some fantastic facilities out of it. But as a result, we've had to be really, really careful, and it's great that we now have the opportunity to do something quite significant, but still not spend a tremendous amount of money. The value part of it comes in what the community come back and tell us about, what they want in it. And I can reassure those of us who are a bit worried, like Councillor Wiley, that we don't have to spend what we can't afford. If the community come back and say, or some people come back and say, we'd like to turn this into a platinum plated whatever, we can say, look, I'm sorry, we can't afford that. And so it will be a matter of weighing cost and value and what we can afford as a community and as a council. And that consultation really is the process of determining that balance. Finally, I don't want to change the resolution now, but I just note that the consultation should include consultation on an appropriate name for the facility, whatever it turns out. But I suspect that the name may well follow from whatever use is determined for it. So it might be premature to even think about changing the name until we know what we're going to fully use it for. Kia ora.
Thank you. I'll put it by division, please. Save you the effort. That's fine.
You'll have to forgive me, this is the first time I've done a division.
It won't be the last.
The resolution is stated in the agenda. If I perhaps, normally I do this alphabetically, but I don't have a list of your names with me. So if I could start with, sorry. In front of the agenda. Oh, I do, thank you. Mike is probably Mike, thank you.
Are we doing option 1 or option 1 and 2?
Option 1. It's the option 1, but it is actually the recommended resolution, which doesn't mention options, but it's the option 1 and effectively option 2 as well.
Thank you.
That's the implication of option 1.
Okay, I'll read your names as on the agenda. Councillor Hawkins, the chairman. Aye. Aye. Councillor Elder. Aye. Councillor Laufiso. Aye. Councillor Benson Pope. Aye. Mayor Cull.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall. Aye. Councillor Lord. Aye. Councillor Newell. Aye. Councillor O'Malley. Aye. Councillor Staines. Aye. Councillor Steedman. Not here. Councillor Vandervis. Aye. Councillor Wiley. Aye. Councillor Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you.
It's carried 14. It was close. It's carried 14 nothing. Thank you for that. That just leaves item 14 in this case, items for notification, items for consideration by the chair, if anyone has any to raise at this point. There being none, that's the end of the meeting. I declare it closed at 3:29. We'll break for 2 minutes, is all we're allowed before the Planning and Environment Committee meeting. Thank you.